There's no slavery in the Quran. There are no concubines in the Quran. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Moses, and today we're going to talk about all the verses of the Quran which contain the term Malakat aymanukum to establish that the Quran has got nothing to do with slavery. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Can you imagine your mother, your sister as someone's slave? As someone's concubine, sex slave? No? Why not? But at the same time, we are conditioned to say and to believe and to accept that it would be okay if that happened to others' women, in particular the non-Muslims who ended up fighting against us. Why do we say that? Why do we end up believing this even though we may not like it for ourselves? Because apparently that is what God said. God said this. I ask, really? Does God really say that? انظر كيف يفترون على الله الكذب وكفى به إثما مبينا. See how they devise lies against God. That alone is an outright sin. Before we begin, I just want to lay it out up front. All of the traditional understandings of this term are flat out wrong. For example, I've got Hilali and Khan translating my Malakat aymanukum as the captives and the slaves that your right hands possess. Pictol translates it, the slaves whom their right hands possess. Yusuf Ali, captives. It's the same deal. No matter what translator you pick up, anybody who's translated the Quran or these terms under the influence of tafsir and or historical reports, you will find the similar sort of meaning coming out from them. And I'm going to say to you once more, all of that is wrong. I'm not just saying that. We're going to look at the Quran. We're going to look at all of the verses to confirm that what I'm saying I can establish and support through the weight or on the basis of what the Quran itself says about itself. Let me ask you a few more questions just to make sure we understand the gravity, the sheer gravity of what we're looking at. We are blaming God for having given us this institution of slavery over the last 1400 years. How many millions of humans have been enslaved directly by blaming God, by blaming Allah, giver of the Quran? How many of your cousins, friends, children that you know have either left Islam or are on the verge of leaving Islam because of all of these lies that are continuously being fed into their ears? Do you know anybody? I know quite a few. How many of us are still justifying making other human beings slaves? And this is the scary part. How many do you know, because I know a few, who still claim that slavery has not been outlawed? It's still available as an option. It could be restarted one day. The Islamic version of slavery, not dead forever yet. So today, we are going to look only at what God says in the Quran. We're not going to talk about the traditional defenses of slavery, such as, hey, look how good Islamic slavery was compared to the others. Now, this is in contrast to the fact that evil is evil, no matter where, who, or whatever the condition might be. Or that, hey, everybody was doing it back then. Muslims couldn't quite stop it unilaterally. So, in other words, what they're saying is Islamic morals are relative and not absolute. Or that, hey, Islamic slavery, or the model that we propose, was actually a very good result, all things considered. Look how it turned out for a lot of slaves. Well, you don't really run your Islamic Sharia, the one that you have made up in the name of God, based on utilitarian outcomes, do you? Well, why use that to defend the undefensible? Or the last one that I really find quite shockingly absurd to even talk about or argue or contend with is, well, God wasn't powerful enough to stop slavery in one go. He had to go step by step. And that is why he did not outlaw it straight away, but he allowed for it to become outlawed. Well, is that the act of an omnipotent God who wanted to give the perfect message to the most perfect messenger? You got a contradiction of terms there, of understanding. I don't know if you're quite getting it. Now, all of these justifications, all of these defenses, these apologetics, I'm not really going to talk about in particular today. I might in a specific video in English down the track, but I'm going to focus, as I said, on what God says in the Quran. If certain things flow from it, so be it, but that is not my focus. Now, before I start, I want to set the scene a little bit so you understand where I'm coming from. Now, up until now, if you've gotten to this video so far, I've been talking in Urdu/Hindi. So I've had a series set up in which I've talked about how the Quran does not talk to the male gender. God of this world, of these worlds, of this universe, is not a he. He does not refer to just the men of the world. He talks to both of us. And that the terms that the Quran uses, for example, Nisa or Rijal, do not necessarily mean what they mean in today's Arabic. As in, Nisa does not just mean women, but it can also mean men in the Quran. And Rijal can mean women in the Quran. Now, this is a series up to 10 videos so far on this channel under my name, where I've covered these concepts, but unfortunately they are in Urdu. So if you struggle to follow along a little bit as you see some of the slides to come, just be aware that I am building on a foundation that may be something you haven't quite been able to hear me on. So apologies in advance. But we're going to charge right ahead. Let's start. What is the meaning of Ma Malakat aymanukum? This will not take a long time. This really won't. Ma is what or who. Malakat comes from intilak, or the act of owning, having the power to control, the authority. Ayman is promises, treaties, deals, oaths, arrangements, anything from that family, so to speak. So what is Ma Malakat aymanukum? Those or that is under your care, promises, oaths. Now, this, as I said up front, is not a hard concept to understand. It's as simple as it really gets. To confirm and corroborate what I just said, we can use the Quran and this term ayman to see whether what I'm saying holds or doesn't. Now, by the way, these aren't my translations. I'm using a traditional understanding just to show you that even they, when they translate, these traditional translators, they don't reflect it beyond the real meaning, which is oaths or promises. So God says, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. Allah will not call you to account for that which is unintentional in your oaths. So أيمانكم, your oaths. إن الذين يشترون بأحد الله وأيمانهم ثمنا قليلا. Verily, those who purchase a small gain at the cost of Allah's covenant and their oaths. وَلِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مَوَالِيَ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَالَّذِينَ عَقَدَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. And to everyone we have appointed heirs of what property is left by parents and relatives, to those also with whom you have made a brotherhood. So this is a point to which I'm going to draw your eye to and your attention to. The same translator, Hilali in this particular example, has translated the same word in the same book with two very different and frankly opposing, contradictory meanings. On the verse on the right, the one we just read, he translated that as Aqadat aymanukum, as with whom you have made a pledge, brotherhood. So ayman, promises, care, same sort of family of meanings, same semantical understanding that we take away from it. But the same person in this ayah on the left says Illa ala azwajihim aw ma malakat aymanuhum. He translates that as except from their wives or the captives and slaves. Very simple question. One word, ayman, used in the same book by the same author. How could that same word at the same time mean a pledge, a promise, an oath, and a person that you buy in the market with whom you can have any sort of sexual relations without any concern, all in the name of God? What, I ask, is the relation between the two? How do you end up justifying this sort of translation? Now, this is not just a simple translator's mistake. This is huge. By changing the meaning from promise, care, agreement to slaves or to the institution of concubinage, now we got harems. We got humans who are becoming slaves. They're becoming sexual objects. They're being bought, traded, sold like cattle. Humans are being punished as slaves if their side loses a war. We have completely and utterly changed the very concept of not just the term, but what it means in terms of its application in real life. And that too has been happening for centuries, and all of that in the name of God. See the problem? Now we're going to look at all of the Quranic ayat where this term, Ma Malakat aymanukum, has been used. So throughout the Mus'haf, throughout the book, throughout Kalamullah, there are 14 ayat where this term has occurred. And we are going to go through in this session every single one of those ayahs. We're not going to leave any stone unturned to clarify, crystallize what the Quran says, what God says to us. So let's begin. The first time we find this term is in Surah An-Nisa, the 3rd ayah. The ayah says, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَلَّا تَعُولُوا. Now, first of all and upfront, not only is there no slavery in this ayah, there are no multiple marriages here either. Sorry to disappoint anybody who has been holding on to the hope that God allows men to have all of these extra wives, but nothing quite like that for the women. God says, and if you all fear, men and women, that you cannot be just to those who have nothing, then form comprehensive formal contracts with those who God has chosen for you from those who are delayed in life, behind in station, weak, people, organizations, etc., mentioned throughout the Quran. In 2s and 3s and 4s, as in there's no limit whether it's 2 or more. But if you fear you cannot be fair, then only one from such weak, delayed, disadvantaged entities or people, or stick to those already under your care. That is better, so you do not deviate. Now, I did hint at this before, but I'm going to set the scene a little bit clearer for you. I have talked about this ayah in detail in my Urdu playlist, where I've gone through this ayah in terms of its context to confirm and establish without any shadow of a doubt, in my humble opinion, that the Quran here does not talk about marriages, number one, and it does not talk to men. This verse, number 3, sits after 2 verses. Now, there's one single narrative that's starting from the very first verse, and it starts with Ya ayyuhan nas, all people, men and women. So the order or the subject of the discussion here is not just men, it's both genders. And this is how the Quran talks. Both of these genders are being told to do this action and that action and this action in the second ayah. And the third ayah is really a continuation of that order that comes in the ayah previous. Throughout, it's gender neutral language. Men and women, associations, whoever you are who comprise the superset people, you are to do this, this and that. Somehow to say we're going to divorce that ayah and a part of it from its context and make it somehow justify multiple marriages and also slavery is completely unfounded. It just doesn't flow. I'm not going to cover this, but if you wanted to see what the 4 ayat of Surah An-Nisa say in the very beginning, you can pause the video here and read the translation, not just of this one particular ayah, but the 2 ayat before and the one after, so you get a clearer idea of what really is happening there and why it's got nothing to do with concubinage or slaves. Go to the next ayah, and again there are absolutely no concubines that you'll find here. The ayah says, وَالْمُحْسَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَأُحِلَّ لَكُمْ مَا وَرَاءَ ذلكم أن تبتغوا بأموالكم محسنين غير مسافحين فما استمتعتم به منهن فآتوهن أجورهن فريضة ولا جناح عليكم فيما تراضيتم به من بعد الفريضة إن الله كان عليما حكيما. And this verse is a continuation again, and that's why I got the dots in there to show, the ellipses show that this is a conversation, a narrative that's building on from what happened before. But if you look at this ayah right now as it is, and the strengthened cadres because of an existing nikah from those whose potential is still to come, except for those already under your care, promises commandment of God upon you. And apart from these restrictions, you are allowed to seek any all with your resources, wealth, in the state of being those who seek to strengthen, solidify, instead of being weak, wobbly, unsure. Then if you have utilized their services through the nikah, as in an arrangement where you're helping each other, then give them their just dues as a duty. And no issue on you all, males and females, in what you decided in it, with mutual willingness after the responsibility. Surely God has been aware and wise, the giver of orders. Let's go to the ayah after that and we'll try and wrap up the two together. ومن لم يستطع منكم طولا أن ينكح المحسنات المؤمنات فمما ملكت أيمانكم من فتياتكم المؤمنات والله أعلم بإيمانكم بعضكم من بعض فانكحوهن بإذن أهلهن وآتوهن أجورهن بالمعروف محسنات غير مسافحات ولا متخذات أخدان فإذا أحسن فإن أتين بفاحشة فعليهن النصف ما على المحسنات من العذاب ذلك لمن خشي العنة منكم وأن تصبروا خير لكم والله غفور رحيم. And whoever doesn't have the capacity, power, chance to enter into a formal, comprehensive engagement with a deficient, delayed entity who is in a strengthened position, then approach from the young, new, startup, peaceful, law-abiding entities in your society, from those already under your care. And God knows best your state of being in Iman, God's rules. A few of you from the few. So enter into these contracts with them with permission of their networks, families, support groups, and give them dues according to custom while they are in a state of being strengthened. Not shaky, wobbly, unsure, and not conspiring, deceiving, wrongdoing with your opponents, competitors. Then if these young entities, communities, groups have become strengthened, and they commit a manifest wrong, their punishment is half from the already strengthened groups, people, communities. That is for whoever among you is aware, fears the hardship. And if you are to persevere, that is better for you. And God is the one who grants connection to Him and merciful. So, ma malakat aymanukum, those already under your care. Nothing to do with concubines or sexual slaves. Nothing whatsoever. Now we're going to try and put those two ayat together so we can again understand them from their context, as in the verses that come before and the verses that come after, to make sense of what is really happening here and to establish that there is nothing to do with the concept of the institution of slavery. Now the ayat before these two, what do they talk about? They talk about those entities with whom nikah, which is a binding contract, nothing to do with marriage, something I've covered elsewhere. Those people that you cannot get into those comprehensive engagements with. So there's a list of all of those that you cannot enter into such an intimate relationship. Now once you have been talking about that, you come to this particular ayah 424, and this ayah is the continuation of what happened before, as in you are not allowed to enter into those engagements with these parties and this party, al-muhsanatu min an-nisa. Now you got an exception, illa ma malakat aymanukum, as in of all of these groups you're not to do that except for these who are already under your care. So you got an exception clause in here. Now some traditional scholars, even they've recognized the fact that there's no way they can just translate this to be concubines or slaves in here. So they have went for a slightly different twist, and they've translated this particular ayah to say illa ma malakat aymanukum as your wives who you have already married. Like you can't marry your wives because you're already married to them. Now that's quite a strange translation, and I won't get into it because that's not quite the concept, not quite the thrust of this conversation here today. But to give you an idea, if we're being honest, there's no way to take these words and twist them out of their context to mean slavery when there's no way to make that happen. We go to the next ayah, and again in this ayah as well, unlike what might be told in traditional understandings, there's no sex, there's no acts like that being talked about. God says, or the command from Him comes to us, and it says, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُوبِ وَصَاحِبِ بِالْجَنْبِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ مَنْ كَانَ مُخْتَالًا فَخُورًا. And serve God, and do not share in that act or with Him anything, anybody, and with the parents goodness, and with those who have qaraba, and those who have nothing, and the poor, and the neighbor close one who has qaraba, and the neighbor close one on the sideline, the companion on the sideline, and the walker on the path, and those whose care you're responsible for. Ma malakat aymanukum, those whose care you're responsible for. Surely God does not love one who is arrogant and boastful. We'll continue. وَاللَّهُ فَضَّلَ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ فِي الرِّزْقِ فَمَا الَّذِينَ فُضِّلُوا بِرَادِّ رِزْقِهِمْ عَلَى مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فهم فيه سواء أفبنعمة الله يجحدون. And God has blessed some of you over others in provisions, God's bounty. Then those who have been blessed do not return their provisions, God's bounty, to those under their care, ما ملكت أيمانهم, under their care, in case they become equals in their risk. Do they renounce God's favor, blessing? No slaves here. No slaves, no concubines. Now I'm going to read two ayat together. I'm going to look at them as a set. And this is one of those, I guess, areas, or these two ayat are probably the strongest case in the arsenal of those who would insist that this term means nothing else but concubines. And they will say, let's talk about sexual stuff. We're talking about private parts. And whenever they come up and the only people who can see, well, they have to be concubines. That's not right. Let's have a read of this ayah and the one after. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. So if we start from the one ayah before, and these who are protectors, guardians over their cause, their mouths, except from their partners or those already under their care, then they are not to be blamed. So furuj, I don't understand this based on my understanding of the Quran to mean private parts. It possibly could signify that. Maybe you could somehow try and justify that in some particular areas. But if we looked at the word and how it's used throughout the Quran, you can't take that meaning and apply that everywhere. If you're talking about an opening, well, our cores have openings. We've got chastity. Our mouths have openings through which we speak and through which we leak and through which we acquire. So if we were really to understand this, looking at the context of these ayat and the overall connection to them, that is the only meaning that I can take away. It's the same verse being talked about in another part of the Quran as well. So إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. So again, from the context of this particular ayah, is the same context. And these who are protectors, guardians over their cause, their mouths, except from their partners or those already under their care, then they are not to be blamed. Now let's put the two ayat together, and for the sake of argument, I'm going to grant you just for a second that yes, farj does mean private parts. Now even if you were to insist and take that meaning, still there's no talk about sex here. What the ayat are really saying is that you are to guard your private parts from everybody except from your wives or those whose care you're under, such as you being a patient in front of a doctor or a nurse. So the question really is, either which of the mafahim you take, either which of the interpretation or the understanding you take, why do we have to put sex in there? Why do we have to translate this term away from its grandeur, from its much vaster meaning, down to the base human instinct every single time? Let's continue. Now this ayah is quite controversial in the sense that apparently, as per them, there's a order for hijab for the women, or the head covering, or sometimes even the face covering, all being derived from this verse. I hold there's no talk of that sort of stuff. Now we're not going to focus on hijab in here. We will talk about in passing. But again, my focus is on ما ملكت أيمانكم or aymanuhun in this case. So the ayah says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن أو آبائهن أو آباء بعولتهن أو أبنائهن أو أبناء بعولتهن أو إخوانهن أو بني إخوانهن أو بني أخواتهن أو نسائهن أو ما ملكت أيمانهن أو التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال أو الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء ولا يضربن بأرجلهن ليعلم ما يخفين من زينتهن وتوبوا إلى الله جميعا أيها المؤمنون لعلكم تفلحون. And tell the weaker mu'mins, mu'minat, not the Muslim women, and tell the weaker mu'mins to control, administer, rein in their insides and guard their closed tongues, and not to express their superficial views, outlooks, except for that which is obvious, and to draw covers over their weaknesses, openings, and not to express their superficial views, outlooks, except to their commanders, leaders of their commanders, their subordinates, subordinates of their commanders, their peers, reports of their strong peers, reports of their weaker peers, their workers who may move on, those already under their care, command, Malakat aymanukum, those already under their care, the authoritative, strong followers currently lacking power, expertise, or those new starters who do not yet understand their weaknesses, deficiencies, weak spots, or those left behind whose potential is still to come. And they are not to strike around with their power recklessly, lest their weaknesses, covered by the superficialness, gets exposed. And you all are to turn towards God, His path, together. All you who believe, follow God's path, so that you all can be successful. There's something very interesting happening in this ayah, by the way. Again, we're not talking about hijab here. We're skirting right past that. أو ما ملكت أيمانهن. The ending here is hun, as in it's going back to the females, apparently. It does not say aymanukum, which is a group that either comprises just men or men and women. So let's derive a logical set of sequence from here. If, as per them, ma malakat aymanukum means those female slaves that you men own, so they're the ones that you are allowed to have sex with, then by the same token of logic, ma malakat aymanuhun, because it refers to females, now refers to male slaves that the women folk own. So the question is, if men are allowed to have sex and all sorts of relationships with their female slaves, when this ayah does not stop it, why are these women folk being denied the privilege of having sex with their male slaves? How you allow one but deny the other? How come you've made halal something, yet haram another one, without any evidence for either of these two acts? This is a major contradiction in all of the traditional understandings and translations. And obviously nothing to mention about how we reduce, through bigotry, the female's role in our lives down to nothing more than a passive victim. I'm going to leave you to think about it, and I'll move on to the next ayah. Now, this ayah is, I would probably say, infamous because of the number of times it gets brought about and brandied about in front of skeptics and those who attack Islam's form of slavery. Because apparently it said, this ayah says, if you're a slave, you can just buy your freedom. This ayah says nothing of that sort at all, unfortunately. Let's read. وَلْيَسْتَعْفِفِ الَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ نِكَاحًا حَتَّى يُغْنِيَهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَالَّذِينَ يَبْتَغُونَ الْكِتَابَ مما ملكت أيمانكم فكاتبوهم إن علمتم فيهم خيرا وآتوهم من مال الله الذي آتاكم ولا تكرهوا فتياتكم على البغاء إن أردنا تحصنا لتبتغوا أرض الحياة الدنيا ومن يكرهن فإن الله من بعد إكراههن غفور رحيم. And these who cannot attract these formal, comprehensive agreements should abstain, stay away until God provisions them from His bounty. And for these already under your care, seeking the command, order, clarification from you, then give that to them if you know good in them, and give them from what God, through His universal laws, gave you. And do not force your young ones, new entities, startups, unjustly on the process of seeking, if they have desired to become stronger, that so you may seek the ordinary base life. Reminder for whoever forces them, even after their compulsion, God remains the granter of connection and merciful. Let's return for a second to the fiqh's understanding of some of the terms in this ayah. Now apparently they say there's a mukataba in the fiqh, and through which you can buy your freedom. And this is something that's, as I was saying before, a lot of the Muslim apologetics utilize this sort of argument. So we see these apologists or these da'i, they come up and they try to present, for quite frankly, a perfect world in which any slave can just ask to be freed. And when that slave puts up their demand, it has to be listened by the master. Now, that's the same person who bought that slave and can sell them on. Now, that the law of the land will help the slave in this pursuit of freedom. and that there are one or two chosen, cherry-picked historical examples which show as a law, as a universal law, that this indeed was the case, except for accepting that these 2 or 3 cherry-picked examples could just be the exceptions, if not made up entirely. You probably have not seen or heard me before. You haven't heard me because I usually talk in Urdu or Hindi. But I, on purpose, do not mix history or human written books when I talk about the Quran, because it's a never-ending debate, discussion. It's a cesspool where we have books for books for books. We've got arguments and counter-arguments, and these things never finish. So I leave this to you. If you are an honest student of history, if you can sift through and decide and pick out the right, the most accurate versions of history, as close as we can get to them, you will find that this perfect world has never existed, does not exist, and cannot exist. A slave cannot do any of these activities to get out of slavery. So unfortunately, A, this ayah says nothing of that sort, and B, this perfect scenario just simply doesn't exist. In other words, slavery is not an employment contract that comes with an out clause. This is not a modern interpretation. We can't put false equivalency in here to try and justify what happened. Can't justify the unjustifiable, I always say. The model of slavery created, perfected in the era of Banu Abbas, masquerading and being paraded around as the Islamic model of slavery, does not support emancipation. It's got nothing to do with it. Let's move on. Now, in this ayah, again, there are a couple of terms that I will mention in passing, but I won't dwell on them. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِيَسْتَأْذِنْكُمْ الَّذِينَ مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ لَمْ يَبْلُغُوا الْحُلَمَ مِنْكُمْ 3 مرات من قبل صلاة الفجر وحين تضعون ثيابكم من الظهيرة ومن بعد صلاة العشاء 3 عورات لكم ليس عليكم ولا عليهم جناح بعدهن طوافون عليكم بعضكم على بعض كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات والله عليم حكيم. O you have believed, spread aman, peace. Let those who are under your care promise his authority, and those who have not yet come into their own ask your permission 3 times. Before the Salat of Al-Fajr, when you organize your preparations, meetings, duties for progress, and after the Salat of Al-Isha. These 3 are the periods of vulnerability for you. Outside of that, no issue on you or them if they were to visit, interact with you repeatedly. That's how God clarifies his signs for you, and he is all-knower and wise judge. Let's go to the next ayah. ضرب لكم مثلا من أنفسكم هل لكم مما ملكت أيمانكم من شركاء فيما رزقناكم فأنتم فيه سواء تخافونهم كخيفتكم أنفسكم كذلك نفصل الآيات لقوم يعقلون. Now, got to understand this ayah from the context. Always context. Context is the king. Before this particular ayah, God has been mentioning his ayat. And again, ayat are God's signs in the universe, in everything he does, everything he creates. He appeals to those with aql, with knowledge, with intellect, with the ability to ponder. He is calling for them to pay attention. Now, after all of those exhortations, we come to this ayah. The translation goes something like this. He strikes for you an example from yourselves. Are there for you, from those under your care, مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, are there those under your care, partners, equals in what we gave you from our provisions, blessings? Then you be in those provisions, blessings equal. You fear them as you fear yourselves. That is how God clarifies his signs for those who engage their intellect. Intellect, again and again. Just as a quick aside, God talks to the intellect. He talks to those who want to use it and engage it, not to those who just want to, with respect, just recite the words without really understanding what that means. We'll go on to the next ayah, and that ayah, this ayah in front, is probably one of the most infamous ayat because of the way we have translated this based upon faulty tafasir and riwayat of Tariq or history. Apparently, as per the normal understanding of this ayah, Nabi Muhammad had many wives, and only he could acquire as many wives as he wanted. A woman could come up offer herself for marriage, and she didn't even have to accept any mahar. The Prophet had to give her nothing in order to marry her and to live the life of a married couple. By the way, as I said before, only for the Prophet was this exception. Haven't we given enough material to all those who wish to criticize the character of this great man? Well, let's read the ayah. Ya ayyuhan nabi, inna ahlalna laka azwajak, allati atayta ujurahun, وما ملكت يمينك مما آفاء الله عليك وبنات عمك وبنات عماتك وبنات خالك وبنات خالاتك اللاتي هاجرن معك وامرأة مؤمنة إن وهبت نفسها للنبي إن أراد النبي أن يستنكحها خالصة لك من دون المؤمنين قد علمنا ما فرضنا عليهم في أزواجهم وما ملكت أيمانهم لكي لا يكون عليك حرج وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. I have understood this ayah to be saying this. O Nabi, we have enabled, made easy, allowed any such partners of yours, partners, not wives, partners of yours to work with, whom you have given their dues, as well as those already under your care, whom God has turned towards you, and the units, entities produced by your strong and weak enforcers, and the units, entities produced by your strong and weak governors, those who have migrated with you on the path, and a believing weakened party, entity, who wishes to dedicate itself to the Nabi's mission, if the Nabi also wanted to seek that arrangement. This dispensation is purely for you as the Nabi, and not the general population of those who are on God's path. We know, are aware of what we have already enjoined on them, the general populace, regarding their partners and those under their care, so that the explaining does not become a burden on you, the Nabi. And God has been a granter of connection to him and merciful. So no wives of the Prophet Muhammad here, none whatsoever being talked about in this particular ayah, or throughout the Quran, I must say. There's no woman coming, offering herself to marry the Nabi Muhammad without receiving any mahar. There's no dispensation for the person called Muhammad bin Abdullah. Now, as I was saying before, this is one of those ayat where I have done a detailed discussion in my Urdu video. For those who do understand it, I encourage you, invite you to go have a look at that. But for now, we'll move on. Again, this ayah, again has been understood to refer to the Prophet's wives. Now, as an aside, I don't quite understand why there's so much emphasis whenever we read the Quran on a person's private life, as if the creator of this world was so intrigued and interested in the intrigues of one person's personal life that he would continue to talk about his wives and his partners and his all these dispensations just for his sexual life. This is not the Quran. This is not what the book says. Let's read the ayah. لا يحل لك النساء من بعد ولا أن تبدل بهن من أزواج ولو أعجبك حسنهن إلا ما ملكت يمينك وكان الله على كل شيء رقيبا. Not allowed, workable for you are newer entities after those mentioned above in the ayat before, nor that you replace them with partners even if their potential impresses you, except for these who are already under your care. Ma malakat yaminuk, those already under your care. And God has been over everything watchful. Let's come to the last ayah in which this term comes up in the Quran. لا جناح عليهن في آبائهن ولا أبنائهن ولا إخوانهن ولا أبناء إخوانهن ولا أبناء أخواتهن ولا نسائهن ولا ما ملكت أيمانهن واتقين الله إن الله كان على كل شيء شهيدا. There is no harm on them, partners of the Nabi, partners, companions, those who help the cause of the Nabi, not the wives. There is no harm on them, the partners of the Nabi, in dealing with their leaders or those working under them, or their fellow brethren entities, people in the mission, or those working for these brethren, or those whose fullest potential is still to come under them, or those already under their direct care command. And they are to be aware of God, his system. Surely God has been aware, witness over everything. These were all of the verses of the Quran in which this term came up. Well, how about we turn to towards a summary of all of these ayat and answer the question that we posed in the very beginning of this video. Does the Quran talk about slavery? Does it allow it? Does it promote it? There is no human slavery in the Quran, period. I cannot be clearer than this. None of these ayat, and we'll cover all of them, talks about a human being becoming an object of sexual lust or pleasure for another without consent. There's no talk about harems, like in this picture, being packed by women, captured as war booty or bought in the market, and all of that being done in the name of God. All of that has got nothing to do with the Islam of the Quran, Islam of God, Islam of Nabi Muhammad. Nothing. Before we wrap up, I've taken the liberty of trying to answer some of the expected questions I can sense coming my way. So let's try and go through them in a proactive manner. So who are ma malakat aymanukum? Well, the context determines who is the target of that term. Now, I'll give you an example. If I said, hey people, as in annas, who is the target I'm speaking to? Now, you won't be able to tell unless you have some context. You'll need to know who I am, where I stand, and whom I am addressing. For example, if I'm a teacher standing in front of the classroom saying, hey people, or hey children, for example, you know who I'm talking to. But if I were the president of a country, standing in front of a large cheering audience, being televised throughout the nation, and I said, hey people, my audience is different. Same word, different context, ends up targeting different people. But generally, the mafhum, or the idea, is that the Quran always refers to the ma malakat aymanukum people as those people, entities, associations who are secured or are covered by oaths, promises, or deals, or arrangements of care. Now, it need not be a permanent state, as in an entity could be there temporarily, but might leave that state eventually. So, just to reiterate, ma malakat aymanukum could be husbands, it could be wives, it could be associations, it could be dependents, it could be refugees. Heck, I, Moses, could be one of these people. Right now, as a father, I've got 2 children who are under my care. They depend upon me. They are those who my right hands possess. They are under my care. They are milk under the ayman that I have. But tomorrow it could change. If something happened to me, if I lost an eye, if I became a cripple, I would be under their care. They grew up, I would be being looked after by them. This is the concept of the Quran. This is the magnificence. This is the bounty of God that He tells, that He gives to us in the Quran. This is a beautiful term. It's vast. It encompasses all sorts of scenarios in which any person, any entity could find itself in need of another, and always find arrangements being ordained by God for that person, that entity to be taken care of. To reduce all of that down to concubines, to sexual contact, is such a shame, is such a travesty, and is such an injustice being done to God's words. Question: but Nabi Muhammad had slaves, didn't he? So did his companions, and I heard they were good masters. Well, isn't it interesting that all of these reports about slavery happen to be collected in the periods of Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, where the royalty practiced this slavery? Isn't that convenient? That when you've got the governing classes doing something, suddenly there are all of these reports that get created or spring up to support their practices. I'll pose a question for those who want to ponder about it, and maybe you can answer on comments afterwards. If the Quran was in Arabic, of the people that was simple, easy for everybody to understand, well, Nabi Muhammad did not leave a dictionary behind, did he? Didn't leave a tafsir that I, Muhammad bin Abdullah, want to explain these words so and so, or these terms mean so and so, or you need fiqh to understand all of this. He didn't leave anything like that. He left one book, one message in the Quran. So the question is, what was the need that despite Arabs being Arabs, had to invent tafasir and riwayat and Israeliyat to understand the Quran? Could they suddenly no longer understand the Quran? Is that what happened? Or did they find that they could not meddle with the text of the Quran, but they could try and manipulate the meaning of Quranic terms into something else by injecting foreign words in the terminology and projecting them over what the Quran said? That, I propose, is what happened to this particular term, ayman, where a word, a term, a concept that had nothing to do with slavery or concubines or sexual slaves somehow magically got transformed into this enterprise of slavery, institutionalized and enforced over the last very many centuries. Question: but we've seen streams and videos where they justify Islamic slavery as humane. Well, I've seen them too, and up until not that long ago, I would agree with them. Now, because I come from that perspective, and I know what they mean, I know what I used to believe, I'd like to think that most of these people, these apologetics, and these apologists, and these defenders, they mean well. They come from a good place. They've got good hearts. They want to justify something that they feel is not being understood well. But you're really trying to still justify the unjustifiable. Slavery is slavery, no matter the form or substance. Evil is evil. Bad is bad. A glass half full of urine is terrible, just as the one which is only a quarter full. You can't say one is necessarily better than the other when both of the choices are bad. We should feel confident in calling both of them bad, not justify one because we feel we have no choice. And the other thing that I found really shocking is this false equivalency between slavery, as it was apparently practiced in an idealized world that doesn't exist, to what we find in our today's world. Now, I've heard examples of soccer players who are earning millions of dollars, like being those slaves who once get into that arrangement could not get out. This is not true. This is false equivalency. And it's an argument that I don't even want to start to unpack because it's childish. And I think anybody with any bit of intelligence knows that this argument is only for those who wish to hold on to a lie whilst having a slight glimmer in their hearts that, well, somehow I can try and justify that. You can't justify it. You know it. I know it. We all know it. We have had these apologists for a long time. We'll continue to have them. But if you're sincere and if you've heard what the Quran says, if you've pondered about them, you know these things cannot be justified. It's time to let go. It's time to move on. Whether it was the Umayyad kings or the Abbasid kings or the Mughals or the Sasani kings or anybody else, whatever they did, their hisab, their reckoning is with their God, and ours is, well, ours. They won't help us and we won't help them. All we can do is make sure we do not pass on wrong messages onwards. Moses, there were a lot of words you did not translate, or you did translate but you did not expand. Yes, that is right. This particular video has been razor focused on one particular term. A lot of these terms I've either talked about before or I will talk in the future. So you just have to give me a chance to talk about them in the future in greater detail. What if you made a mistake, Moses? Well, I'm a human. I've never claimed perfection, nor do I do. All I do is a student of the Quran. I read the Arabic words of an Arabic book, and what they say, I present them. I don't add, I don't remove. Now, at the end of the day, still, having said that, that is my fahm, that is my understanding. Don't follow it. I don't ask you to do it. All I ask is you consider this. If what I say is convincing and you have confirmed that, corroborated yourself, then don't follow me, follow what the words say. And maybe you'll get a better interpretation and understanding than me. Having said that, if you think there could have been a word I could have used better or an English term that maybe I did not quite use in the right way, do let me know. And any way where you think I could be improved upon, please put that into the comments and I will pay attention. I will listen. I will take it from you. But at the end of the day, I think we should all ask this question. Is this tafsir or understanding of the Quranic ayat to do with this topic? Do they give due reverence and respect to God's words, like what He and His kalam, His word, deserves? or what we've been hearing for the last 1200 years, the really just way of understanding God and what He wants from us? That is for you to decide. I generally always respond to comments, so if there's anything you want to talk about or any observations or questions, do put them in the comments below the video. If there's something I don't know about, I'll admit to it. If there's something I can quickly answer, I shall. If it's something that will take longer, I will probably have to cover that up separately, maybe in a video. Or if I ever do a live stream in English, maybe we could talk through that in there. 3 last things before we finish up this video. Do you know anybody on the brink of leaving Islam based on all of these lies? Please share this video. Let them watch it. Let them hear another perspective before they jump. Have you got children? I do. Please, now, whilst you still got them, whilst you can still teach them, get them onto the path of God and the Quran. Don't let them be fed by all of this, with respect, garbage that they've set up to justify and venerate this institution of slavery. We need to save our children from this dark future. We cannot have it anymore. We really can't. Now, this is my advice every time to anybody I speak. If you hear someone talking about God or His path, compare that against the Quran. If what they say is against the message of the Quran, no matter who they are, no matter which book they quote, you should reject it straight away and move on. Last ayah for today. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا أَوْ كَذَّبَ بِالْحَقِّ لَمَّا جَاءَهُ أَلَيْسَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ مَثْوًى لِلْكَافِرِينَ. And who does greater wrong than he who fabricates lies and attributes them to God, or calls the truth a lie when it has come to him? Is there not in hell a dwelling for the blasphemers? With that, until the next time, peace. Assalamu alaikum.